Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
All right, Karen, I'm glad you stopped by for our appointment so we can chat before you write the final draft of your essay.
Is there something wrong? Is there something I forgot?
Well, you've got the correct essay form and all that. You've followed the writing guidelines very well, so there's no problem there.
Well, that's encouraging, Professor. Phew.
I'm just a little unclear about some of the content. You seem to be unsure of what you want to say in a few places, and I want you to take a look at that. Don't forget, the assignment was to write a review of any book you read this term and then provide an analysis. I notice you've left out your analysis.
Oh, yeah. I'm a little hazy about... It's just that I'm not sure about the point the author is trying to make. Early in the book, the main character, Rebecca, is excited to hear about her transfer to the overseas office, but then suddenly she's rather upset about going. When I sat down to write the analysis, I just wasn't sure why. I'm not sure if the author wanted the reader to think Rebecca's transfer was a good thing or a bad thing. I can't find reasons why Rebecca has this change of heart.
Well, the author is intentionally leaving this out. This sort of ambiguity you experience in the story is a technique the writer is intentionally creating. Nothing is ever black and white.
Oh.
We don't always understand the reasons we do things, right? So you might want to analyze the ways the author uses words to hint at this uncertainty. Well, I prefer the term ambiguity.
But should I be focusing on the main character in the analysis, or should I describe the author's writing techniques?
Well, it really depends on how you want to develop your essay. It would be interesting to describe the events surrounding the main character's change of heart. You can analyze the main character in detail, filling in the gaps to see if you can find reasons in her personality why she'd suddenly change her thoughts about the transfer. Of course, you should give examples of the words and writing techniques the author uses to create this point of view.
Okay.
Now, to go one step further in your analysis, do you think the main character is similar to the author? And the author leaves the reader with unanswered questions about the motives of the main character. Why would the author do this?
To create unknowing? To create an uncertain feeling.
Okay, now you're catching on. It might be an uncomfortable feeling, but this is what the author had in mind.
Okay. Thanks, Professor. I'll go back and read the book more closely.
Why did the professor make an appointment with the student? What does the student not understand about the book? What suggestions does the professor give the student to help her write her analysis? At the end of the meeting, what is the professor's attitude toward the student? Why does the professor say this to the student?
And the author leaves the reader with unanswered questions about the motives of the main character. Why would the author do this?
Listen to part of a lecture in a sociology class.
Sociology is really a cross-disciplinary field. We find that elements of biology, psychology, and other sciences often overlap as we study particular phenomena. So let me introduce a concept from cognitive psychology. Okay, Let's say someone asks you to look at a list and memorize as many items on it as you can. Most of us are able to remember, on average, 7 items. There are several variations of this memory test, and the results consistently show that the human limit for short-term memory is 7 bits of information. This limit is called channel capacity. Channel capacity is the amount of information that can be transmitted or received over a specific connection, like our brain. And the channel capacity for our short-term memory, it has some interesting real-life implications, like phone numbers. Local numbers here in the United States all have 7 digits because the phone companies realized early on that longer numbers would lead to a lot more wrong numbers being dialed. But the idea of channel capacity doesn't apply just to our cognitive abilities. It also affects our relationships with people around us. Psychologists talk about sympathy groups. These are the people, close friends, family, to whom we devote the most time. We call or see them frequently, we think about them, worry about them, and studies show for each of us the size of that group is about 10 to 15 people. But why so small? Sure, relationships take time and emotional energy, and most of us don't have unlimited amounts of either. But what if there's another reason? What if it's our brain that's setting the limit? And in fact, there's evidence that indicates that our social channel capacity may actually be a function of our brain size, or more accurately, the size of our neocortex. The neocortex is the frontal region in the brain of mammals that's associated with complex thought. Primates have the largest neocortexes among mammals, but among different primate species, humans, apes, baboons, neocortex size varies. A lot of theories have been proposed for these variations, like maybe it's related to the use of tools, but no theories ever seemed like a perfect explanation until the late 1990s, when an anthropologist named Robin Dunbar published an article about his studies of primates. Dunbar's theory is that if you look at any particular species of primate, you'll find that if it has a larger neocortex, then it lives in a larger social group. Take human beings. We have the largest neocortexes, and we have the largest number of social relationships. So, we've said that our sympathy group is 10 to 15 people. What about our other relationships, other than family and close friends, such as those that occur in the workplace? We'll call these social groups, as opposed to sympathy groups. How many relationships can we handle there? Those relationships aren't as involved, so we can handle more of them. But is there an upper limit? Well, Dunbar says that there is, and he developed an equation to calculate it. His equation depends on knowing the ratio between the size of the neocortex and the size of the whole brain. That is, of the whole brain, what percentage of it is taken up by the neocortex. Once you know the average percentage for any particular species, the equation predicts the expected maximum social group size for that species. For humans, that number seems to be about 150. So according to Dunbar's equation, our social groups probably won't number more than 150 people. Now, Dunbar's hypothesis isn't the kind of thing that's easy to confirm in a controlled experiment, but there is anecdotal evidence to support it. As part of his research, Dunbar reviewed historical records for 21 different traditional hunter-gatherer societies, and those records showed that the average number of people in each village was just under 150. 148.4 to be exact. Dunbar's also worked with biologists to see if his hypothesis applies to other mammals besides primates. When they looked at meat-eating mammals, carnivores, they found that the ones with a larger neocortex also have a bigger social group. and the number of individuals in that group is predicted by Dunbar's equation supporting his hypothesis. But when they looked at insectivores, mammals that eat insects, the results were inconsistent. The data didn't disprove Dunbar's hypothesis, but it wasn't a nice, neat match like the carnivore studies. Which isn't totally surprising. Insectivores are hard to observe since many of them only come out at night, or they spend a lot of time underground, so we know a lot less about their social relationships.
What is the lecture mainly about? Why does the professor discuss the length of some telephone numbers? What does the professor imply about the size of a person's sympathy group? What did Dunbar's study of the records of some traditional hunter-gatherer societies indicate? What does the professor say that biologists discovered in their research of animals other than primates? Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
But why so small? Sure, relationships take time and emotional energy, and most of us don't have unlimited amounts of either.
Why does the professor say this?
Sure, relationships take time and emotional energy, and most of us don't have unlimited amounts of either.
Listen to a conversation between a student and an employee in the housing office.
Hi, ready to check out? I'll just need your key.
Actually, there was a problem, so I'm not checking out yet.
Okay. Remember, you have to clear out of your dorm by 4 p.m. today.
Okay, but the thing is, I just got a couple of fines from the housing office that I'm supposed to pay.
Yeah, we just did inspections yesterday afternoon.
Okay, but I don't really agree with the fines, so I wanted to come here and see if you can help me understand what's going on, and if I really need to pay them.
Okay, maybe I can help. So, why exactly were you fined?
Well, for one thing, I had a really messy roommate, so the dorm room wasn't exactly in great condition.
I know it may seem unfair, but the policy is that both roommates are responsible for the condition of the dormitory room. The university has this policy because there were so many cases in the past where neither person would admit to damages, making it hard for us to resolve these situations. Both parties are responsible. So even if your roommate was the one who messed the room up...
Okay, well, I'm not sure that's the fairest policy in the world, but it makes sense. So I'll pay that fine. No problem.
Okay, so was there something else?
Right. The real problem is with another fine, for a piece of missing furniture, a chair.
Well, yeah, if there's a piece of furniture missing, the university is going to have to charge you for that.
But the thing is, I never had a chair. I borrowed one from the lounge for the year and then returned it yesterday morning. You know, I have a friend who lives in another building, and his dorm room also had a chair missing, but he didn't get a fine.
Okay, but there might be differences between your situation and your friend's. Did you let your floor supervisor know that you had a missing chair?
I told her about it the day I moved in.
And then?
And then?
Did she fill out a form about this? You would have gotten a copy.
I never saw a form.
Okay, I think this is why we're having a problem here. We need to have a paper record that your dorm room was missing a chair. Just telling the floor supervisor...
But honestly, I was expected to know that someone had to fill out a form?
No, actually, it was the responsibility of the floor supervisor to get that form to you when you informed her that your dorm room was missing a chair.
Ah, okay. So what about the fine?
Well, I'm going to have to talk to my manager, but I guess you're not going to have to pay that fine. Don't write this in stone, but I'd imagine you're going to be okay. Floor supervisors have responsibilities too.
Why does the student go to the housing office? According to the man, why does the university hold both roommates responsible for dormitory room fines? Why does the student mention a friend who lives in another dormitory? Why does the man believe the student probably will not need to pay one of the fines? Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
Did you let your floor supervisor know that you had a missing chair?
I told her about it the day I moved in.
And then?
And then...
What can be inferred about the student when she says this?
And then...
Listen to part of a lecture in an environmental science class.
Okay, so environmentalists have created green building programs in order to encourage green building construction, which means environmentally friendly buildings that produce a minimum of pollution and are energy efficient.
We've talked about technologies that use solar energy for heating homes.
Yes, that's certainly something these programs advocate, but they're also concerned with construction because green building standards include the conservation of natural resources like trees. Wood homes such as those traditionally built here in the United States require over an acre of trees, over an acre of forest land in lumber. Plus 3 to 7 tons of waste are created on average during the construction process. So, what if we could use a product that's typically considered waste to build homes? It's being done. One of the materials used in green building construction is straw bales. Yes, I'm talking straw, those short stalks that are left over in farm fields after grain crops are harvested. It's hard to get rid of as a waste product, and it's usually burned. So, instead of adding to air pollution problems by burning the straw, it's compressed into bales and used to build homes.
Wow, I've never heard of using straw to build homes.
Well, straw bale construction isn't a new technique. Pioneers on the American prairie, where there were no trees, constructed their homes of straw bales over 100 years ago. And many of those early buildings, made in what's called the Nebraska style, are still standing. Actually, straw bale construction has been used around the world for thousands of years, and because of the very properties that make it a nuisance waste, that it's tough and hard to compost, that's what makes straw a great building material. It's the insulating properties of straw bales that are probably the strongest selling point. In fact, a standard straw bale wall provides about 3 times the insulation value of an insulated wall in a traditional wood frame house, which can drastically reduce the amount of heating or cooling needed to keep the house comfortable. So environmentalists love this construction method that basically turns a waste product into a building material, saving energy and saving trees. Paul?
So how do you make a house out of straw? It almost sounds too good to be true.
Straw bale houses are actually built out of standard rectangular agricultural bales. They're stacked like bricks to form the exterior walls. Then the straw walls are sealed with stucco. Stucco is a good, tough finish that's like cement or plaster. These stuccoed straw bale walls can then be used as the structure to support the roof. The stucco skin acts as a thin shell over the bales and makes the buildings very stable. And there are more green advantages here. The composite effect of the straw insulation plus the stucco coating can actually create something like a passive solar building. Passive solar means that, assuming the building is oriented correctly to sun and shade, it can heat and cool itself largely without modern heating and air conditioning systems that consume a lot of energy. Yes, Jane?
But aren't straw bale houses a fire hazard? I mean, straw burns so easily.
Well, it turns out that they're actually more fire resistant than the standard wood frame construction. Individual stalks of straw will burn, of course, but when they're compressed into bales, they become fire resistant because oxygen can't circulate through the bale. Burning a bale is like trying to burn a dense stack of thick books, like telephone directories. An individual page of a telephone directory will burn easily, but 1,000 pages tightly pressed together is another story. And also, the stucco coating prevents oxygen from reaching the bales, further reducing its flammability. So, is straw bale construction too good to be true? Well, there has been a renewed interest in it worldwide, which is not surprising since from an environmental standpoint it has very specific advantages in terms of waste, energy, and construction processes. Unfortunately, there are drawbacks for home builders in the United States. It isn't a common building technique yet, so there can be difficulties getting your building plans approved. And it can be more expensive than to build a traditional wood frame home. So this is where I think local and national governments may have a role to play. They could encourage the construction of straw bale houses with enticements, like tax breaks or reductions on fees for building permits.
What is the main purpose of the lecture? What are two ways that straw bale construction is compatible with green building standards? Why does the professor mention Nebraska-style homes? According to the professor, what are the advantages of using stucco coating in straw bale construction? Why does the professor mention a stack of telephone directories? What is the professor's opinion of the popularity of straw bale construction in the United States? Listen to part of a lecture in an art history class.
Okay, now, unfortunately, works of art don't last forever. The question is, what do we do about that? I mean, when you're going to restore art, well, there's a question, isn't there? On the one hand, we want to repair the work. We want to replace a sculpture's missing arm, for example, or make the colors of a painting that's faded and changed over time. We want to put it back like it was. We want to restore it, make it whole again, perhaps even improve it. But on the other hand, we want to preserve the authentic remains. We don't want to change it. We want it pure, true. And the history of restoration practices reflects this struggle. During the European Renaissance, the 16th and 17th centuries, the discovery of antiquities, ancient works of art, was at an all-time high, and so was restoration. But even then, there was this debate. On the one hand, and this is the school of thought that's perhaps best represented by the Italian sculptor Benvenuto Cellini. Anyway, for Cellini, the goal was repair, and not only repair. Cellini and others considered it their artistic prerogative to use ancient material as both a model of inspiration and as a source of raw material. They took a lot of fragments and combined them into complete sculptures.
But how did they know what the complete sculpture looked like if all they had was a fragment?
Well, that's just it. They didn't. And it didn't matter. They'd just create parts as they saw fit. Sometimes they'd combine fragments, put together an arm from here, a leg from there.
You mean from different sculptures?
Oh, sometimes even from different time periods. Take, for example, the so-called Bateman statue of Mercury. The Bateman statue of Mercury at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art is just such a pastiche. The head isn't from the same sculpture as the body, and the legs, as well as the base, were made by the restorer.
But that's hardly restoration. That's just, creation, I guess. They're just making their own sculpture out of recycled parts.
Well, but what's wrong with that? I mean, why not reuse the broken bits?
Well, isn't it a bit of a lie? I mean, especially if they present the restored work as the original, as restored art rather than created art. It's a matter of what's authentic and what's not. And don't you think it's a little disrespectful to use famous bits as raw material?
You know, I remember Cellini being quoted as saying, quote, "The excellence of this great artist calls me to serve him," end quote. And then he proceeded to serve him by creating, from just a torso, a whole brand new sculpture. Of course, the major criticism of that kind of restoration is that it imposes the contemporary aesthetic on the original work. The person doing the so-called restoration is no doubt influenced by the fashions and tastes of the day. Remember, they often thought of themselves as improving the work. Now, on the other hand, in contrast to Cellini, were Michelangelo and company, those who thought the goal was simply preservation. Michelangelo believed ancient fragments should be left alone, preserved as is. If it's just a torso, leave it as just the torso, as the original work. His view, some say, shows a far greater respect for the original art.
Yeah, well, Cellini probably thought he was helping the original artist by completing, perhaps even improving, the original.
Perhaps.
Arrogance is more like it.
Okay. Now, later, though, in the 18th century, we're talking a couple of centuries after the Renaissance, restorers who worked in the Cellini model were criticized in just the ways you've suggested. They were accused of disregarding the value of ancient material and of self-aggrandizement, of using restorations to advance their own careers. And so, restorers started to incorporate attention to historical accuracy into their efforts. The field of restoration started to become more of a science than an art, though of course art was still central. But those who engaged in restoration now were not so much artists as they were historians. That shift may be one of the most important moments defining the development of restoration. The goal changed from artistic invention to authenticity, from restoration to preservation.
Michelangelo would have been happy with that shift.
Yes, I think he would have.
What is the main purpose of the lecture? According to the professor, what characteristic of the Bateman statue of Mercury reflects a typical Renaissance practice? What is the male student's attitude toward Cellini's practices? Why does the professor mention Michelangelo? How did the goals of restoration change in the 18th century? What does the professor imply when he says this?
You know, I remember Cellini being quoted as saying, quote, "The excellence of this great artist calls me to serve him," end quote. And then he proceeded to serve him by creating, from just a torso, a whole brand new sculpture.